Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Driving Optimism. This is a podcast by the MC Squared Studios, and we are your humble host here. It's James Galindo, coolly drinking his Australian coffee, and I am Shane Nantes here, also with an Australian backdrop, but not currently in Australia. Jim, how you doing? How is Australia today? Tell us.
It's good. I think I was telling you a couple days ago that it's cooled off a little bit, but I've softened in my old age where, a 10-degree drop is significant to me. Growing up in Missouri where a 40-degree drop was pretty common, 10 degrees, well, I'm complaining a lot. So I'm a wimp.
You're snowflaking pretty hard with your climate and your coffee at the moment.
I'm no Tyler Durden right now, that's for sure.
So things are good here. Thanks for not asking. I appreciate that. And today, so this is our 5th episode, which is cool. And we've been talking about COVID because it's COVID season. It may be COVID season for a lot longer. You and I don't know, talking here today on the 2nd of May, 2020. We could be doing this again in 2021. We don't know, but we've been talking about that. We wanted to, I think today we'll probably do like our last for now of the COVID season, and then we'll transition. I think that sounds,
Yeah, talk about other things, problems that may not be resolved as an outcome of COVID, or things that we've always talked about before that we're passionate about prior to this as well. So that's good.
Yeah. So next episode, you and I are going to bring our favorite books and kind of talk about some of the, we're not going to get super intellectual, but we're just going to at least talk about some of the things we read. So how we think about some of these problems, and then we'll kind of go into season 2, which will be how to think about problem solving, or how we think about problem solving. Maybe that's a better way to put it. So, but without further ado, we bring you episode 5 of Driving Optimism, which is subtitled The Silver Linings Playbook. I actually did not see that movie. Did you see that movie, Jim?
I did. It's pretty good.
Good. I'm glad one of us.
I recommend it highly.
Okay. Great. So we're trying to today we did mention a few things about what we thought might be good about COVID, but we want to go back in and drill down as the jargon goes into some of those particular areas a little bit more. And we also, as we get into our 5th episode, want to get a little bit more efficient with our time. We'll try to, I'm not the world's best editor yet, as we all know, or producer, but I'm on my way.
And I'm trying to get better at focusing on delivering a more efficient way of getting to my point rather than sometimes rambling. So I ask the audience to please forgive me anytime I ramble.
That's right. There's only efficiency here, but we're getting better. I mean, stick with us.
Yes.
That's for sure.
That's the point.
But today, just in case you don't stick with us, the thing that Jim and I want to talk about today, and what we want you to know more than anything, is that change is good.
Yes, indeed.
Right? It's going to be a lot of change, but change is good. So I don't know. I'll let you kind of kick off that changes.
So
for the folks, just kind of give them the punchline, and then we'll start ramping up the points.
So change, as many people know, happens gradually and then suddenly, right? So, but I think the other aspect of change and the important point to take away from this is that getting in early and being part of the change, you have a better chance of influencing the outcome. So participating in that, seizing the opportunity, and participating. It's the most important thing right now, but also understanding the problems that predate this and opportunities to change those. That's something to really think about, not resisting change. Because if you resist change, wait till last minute, you may not get the outcome that you want. The world's going to be different, and you're not going to be prepared for it. So that's, think about it this way. And we've talked about, we're talking prior to this episode about historical events. And Imagine it's 1860, there's some abolitionist printers printing, anti-slavery publications, and there's a group of people that are like, no, we don't want that. You can't do that. And there's a pretty famous event where in Chicago, a bunch of slavery advocates stormed this building intent on seizing the printing press. They ended up killing the guy who printed the publication, and they threw the printing press into the river.
Jeez.
And that was the first time a white person had died defending abolition. And then shortly after that, John Brown and all those other things. So things escalated pretty quickly. And all those people that didn't want that change couldn't really understand. Yes, they were impacted economically, and that was their driving force, but they were not able to see, actually, you have people that are slaves, and that is a problem, right? So think about the things that are present, the problems that are present, and participate in that, and think, be empathetic, understand the problem in that respect, not purely from a personal perspective as well. And you can come out the other side benefiting, and society will benefit as well. That's all I want to say. And sorry if I rambled.
You did ramble, but we're going to hone in on 2 points. So the first point is get in early. And the second point, you said empathy. I'm going to go even more Machiavellian than that, or anti-Machiavellian is, and if you really break down slavery is about some one person's self-interest over another human being's best interest, right? And so what you're saying is it's more than empathy. It's actually, you have to almost suspend your self-interest in the moment and try to understand how the change could have long-term benefits. You almost like have to stop thinking short-term in order to get through change. Because if you only think short-term, you cannot physically change.
Absolutely. That's a great point.
So I think those are really great points that you made. And it was a little bit long, but that's a good start. So let's actually kind of go into the areas that we think are going to change. And again, for those, not everyone gets to listen to the whole episode. So I'm just going to kind of headline them, and then I'll let you start. So we're looking at things like the change in the healthcare system, change in the economic system, which I'll leave at that, and we're going to go into what we see about that. Change in education, which we've talked about in a couple other episodes, but we'll try to dig in there a little bit more. Change in the workplace, the multiple different kinds of workplaces. And then we'll probably end with changes in family, because that's really what we primarily like to think about here, is how does it affect the family and the community. And again, I guess since we kind of listed the headline, this is our personal opinion. We will have some references in the show notes. We have strong opinions, loosely held or medium held. We do have some evidence to back ourselves up, but this is opinion. We are not experts. Don't make stock picks based off of what we're saying today. But please, find us on Twitter. We're Driving Optimism. We're happy to have a conversation if any of these things aren't in alignment with what you see. And we'll come back to them in the future as well and see where we were right or wrong, over time. So that holds us accountable. So without further ado, Mr. Galindo, take us through the healthcare system, which you're fairly familiar with.
Yeah. So at a basic level, I mean, the healthcare system in the U.S. is very different than the healthcare systems around the world. So like here in Australia, it's a social system. There's a blend of private. Europe's mostly social as well. And so the difference primarily is that, obviously your healthcare isn't tied to your employer. So if you lose your job, that's one thing. One aspect
it's not tied to your employer. That's a big difference.
Yeah, that's a big difference. But two, everyone shares in the same risk pool. So our taxes come out here in Australia, go into a system that provides healthcare equally across the entire population. And so the cost is lower for each individual. Plus, there is that centralized negotiating power of a single healthcare organization to negotiate prices for things, benefits
super
like
important.
that.
Yeah,
super important. The other aspect that's different as well is because it's really focusing on providing healthcare for a large population. Social systems focus more on outcomes, so that people don't revisit the hospital, rather than profits. And so that decision making is a very different model, where it's more beneficial for hospitals or healthcare systems in the US to have somebody in the hospital long term, because they can make more money, and less for the insurance companies. But
I'm going to cut you off there.
Yep.
What's going to be the big change for people here?
Well, okay, for individually or collectively?
Individually first, then collectively.
I think individually, probably the big change is getting over the idea that private healthcare is better than social healthcare. All the data suggests that you have better outcomes, better life expectancy in a social system. And there's no arguing this. Like, people will say that it's not true, but even the CIA World Book shows that metrics for healthcare and social systems are better in 50 countries than they are in the United States. And the cost is significantly lower. So there's that, but that's a mental, people are tied to the idea that socialism is bad. And some aspects of it are, yes, but
I'm going to push you on this in a second.
Like,
So what's the collective one? Because I'll go back to the individual one for a second. What's the collective change that's going to be hard in the U.S. moving to public healthcare from a private system?
I think making it effective right out of the gate.
Yep.
Because, how do you go from one model to the other? I mean, even just doing it in a single hospital is tough. Doing it at a national scale is going to be incredibly difficult. So there's going to be some pains. I mean, Obamacare tried to nudge us that way a little bit with ACA, but without actually fully doing it by creating those markets, which, we're not, sorry, that's my alarm on my phone, which were not fully adopted. And there were trade-offs, but they were trying to move to more towards an outcome-based model while still being private, which was a step in the right direction. But the bigger step, I mean, that's a massive change. And it's going to change how doctors work, how nurses work, how everyone interacts with healthcare, for the better. But, getting people to understand and agree to that at scale is going to be difficult.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really excited about this. This is a grateful thing to be coming out of COVID, is that we'll get public healthcare. And I would say it's hybrid healthcare. I'm going to push you a little bit to be a little different. To erode the perception that it's worse, because that's a perception that you brought up, that people have, that private is better than public. And I think it'll have to be a hybrid, because this country, I mean, Australia has a great system where you've got public and then you have this private to complement for special visits.
Most every country that's social has a hybrid model.
Yeah. So
but at its core, everyone still has the social network to fall on, and then they can do the private if they want to, right? It's a choice.
Correct. Yes. But that's an important distinction, though, because in this time where people are oversimplifying things, that's not socialism. That's a hybrid model that put outcomes first, that caps profits for a bigger purpose, which is preventative healthcare and the overall well-being of the society, right?
Yep.
And so I just think that's a different thing. And I think one thing that will happen in the U.S. will be more public-private, like even more explicit private partnerships that even happen in Australia. You've actually brought up one that's, I don't know if they're public-private partnership, but like Kaiser Health, right? How they kind of run a closed system. But you could see things like, you could imagine things like CVS, which is from Rhode Island, running a partnership with the Rhode Island Department of Health, where they have some sort of like public drop-ins at all the CVS locations, at which they want to roll that out anyway, right? Yep. So I just think that's, and I'm fine with that model. It's still better, especially we have to, and that's the other point I think you made subtly that has to be drawn out. The other change that will happen in America is that healthcare will be decoupled from employment. It has to be. It has to be right now. It has to be immediately. Yeah. That's actually the biggest change that needs to happen. So rolling out that everyone has Medicare, you can keep your private health cover. Nothing is changing on that, but everyone now has Medicare.
Yep.
So that's, anyway, that's going to be exciting. It'll be interesting to see how the public-private stuff plays out. And
I mean, we could spend hours talking about this, about all the different permutations and changes. It's the opportunity is great on so many levels, and we should devote some episodes later, which we will, to this.
We should. We definitely talk more about healthcare. And I guess, again, to that, the bigger, our takeaway today, which is change is good. This is going to be a good change. But I think I also had a little caveat there that change is good, but it's not always easy. And this is not going to be an easy change, even if it's for the best for us. And it is. Yeah. And so I think that's kind of I wish we had a better takeaway there, but I think that's just the truth, right? Let's be realistic about it. And then maybe the takeaway is, for people who are listening, if they hear other people kind of talking about the interim steps of the transition to public health care, they should talk about the long-term steps and the overall public good and how this is going to prevent mortality and enhance communities, all that good stuff. So I think, cheerleading the change is actually has its merits at times.
And in addition to that, just not just mortality, but long-term disease management and prevention. So subtle little things can be available to everyone for free that prevent them from having long-term diseases, and they're able to work and have a full and happier life. And some of it's just so simple and basic, but a lot of people don't have access to that in America. People that have jobs and good insurance do. So.
Yeah, I mean, people that have jobs and insurance sometimes don't even have access to that, or the retirees who spend all their money in healthcare and lose their house. I mean, it's a travesty what's happening to people in America.
Yeah.
Again, we'll talk more about healthcare. Let's get on to brighter topics. Let's actually jump down to the workplace, because we have kind of the economy and workplace, and I think, and just as a time check, I would say maybe we do a few minutes on the economy and the workplace, a few minutes wrapping up in education. And then families, and then we're going to close out for the day. So, how do you see? Let's start small and to start with the workplace, and then let's kind of go from the workplace to like what that will mean for the economy.
I'm glad that there's this. Employers are going to see that you don't need to be in an office to be productive. A lot of companies have known this for a while, but there's so many more that don't, or they've been resistant, or culturally some managers are resistant. It's now going to be more common practice and accepting of that. And the other thing that I'm really excited about is people don't need to live in congested big cities anymore. We can all do our jobs and live in remote communities and take our money and our incomes and feed into those smaller communities, and help upskill locals in those fields that we're in that really wouldn't have had the opportunity unless they moved to a big city. So the opportunities are so great. Distribute the economy more broadly rather than big city centers, which, I grew up in a medium to small size town of about 70,000 people. And that town has been devastated by so many things economically. And, that'll be exciting. And it's great. I don't know. What about you? What do you think is going to happen?
In the workplace, you're right. So, but I see, I hate to be negative, Nelly, but I see pros and cons to I'm very excited for the remote work and therefore the decentralization of all types of employment, right? So that makes, I do think it means we should be bailing out Amtrak versus the airplanes that have more trains in the world. But that's another podcast for another day. That's an article I've been waiting to write for too long. But that said, so I guess my only takeaway from that is my worry here, or I should say, I don't want to worry because I can control this, so it shouldn't be worry. I am going to encourage those people who are managers of remote workers to know that to remember, I should say, that just because you can measure it doesn't mean it matters. And that some of the digital only metrics really lose a lot of the nuance of work. I've worked in these very kind of technocratic places where you start to replace FaceTime with employees with these tracking essentially of their
dashboards.
Yeah, thank you. Dashboard. That's a nicer way of saying it. And that's not the worldview. And I think, I just know a lot of people, as they go digital, as they have this remote workforce, are going to go to these dashboards and they're going to manage to the wrong metrics and kind of miss some of the point. Maybe it's not preventable, but it's just a heads up, people. This is going to happen.
Those dashboards should be informative about how you adjust to things. They shouldn't be the be all end all of day-to-day operations, right? It's about your team and productivity and output and quality of which a dashboard can't really gauge quality. That's something else, right?
Yeah,
value.
Correct. Yeah.
How do you measure and present value in a dashboard? It's your customers that do that, right? Not your employees.
Yeah, so, it's that part is tough. So that's the only thing I would make sure people.
It's a good point. It's a very good point, Shane. Yep.
So the other, That said, I guess to be efficient on time, so you probably have about another 5 minutes left. I mean, the other kind of thing I have in the workplace is, okay, this is a positive. This is a positive if you interpret it as a positive. I think it's also just a practicality. As people go back to work, and I think not just back to work, but over time, you're going to start to see tiering of the workforce, right? The workforce that has to be in location, the workforce that travels, the workforce that, and I think that tiering, while good and opens up opportunity, is going to contribute to a little more stratification at work. In some ways, you know, who is the most valuable that wants to go in. People have, and unfortunately, it's most because people have this identity that's tied to their job, right? So it's not so much the job is doing that. Well, the job is doing that in some ways because they're saying who's 25%, who's 50%, who's 75%. But people have an identity tied to their job as well. So it'll be interesting to see how organizational change happens, how that impacts people, their perception of themselves, and then how the corporation manages employee well-being, because it's really just like a school now will have to kind of manage children's well-being in a community a little bit more. Employers have to now too, right? In a way that they were never expected to, really.
Yeah.
And
Well, yeah. I mean, it's you want them to, but I think part of managing well-being, or that whole concept of a corporation managing employees' well-being, you know, I've worked at places where they talk about those types of things, and they have corporate values, and then I've walked into too many jobs where after about a month I realized that was some branding and marketing exercises that and I'm a sucker. Like, I really want to believe all that stuff, and you get there and you realize that's not true in daily operations. And I hope that that's an outcome of this, but I'm not sure that will be. Like, there's still a lot of moving parts, adapting to all this, and there's going to be a few things that get sacrificed along the way. And I don't think that's going to last. That's going to survive some of the changes that are happening. I hope I'm wrong, but I think caring for the employees, bottom line, is still a driver behind most companies, right?
so I think this is going to change. I really think, it's
I
going
hope
to
you're
be,
right.
I think it's going to be, well, I'm not saying that, they will have to care for their employees, but I think it will stick because there's going to be fewer corporations, and the corporations are going to have a conscience, and people are going to choose to work there. They're going to now I'm really going to fast forward. Like, we're kind of post dip, and people, and I do think, I guess the other fast forward is, I actually think this is going to be good for wages and good for the employees still in the workforce, and even good for the employees that get turned out of the workforce. If, going back to your original point, we get them there quickly, and they're in healthcare jobs, and they're in these expanding jobs early, right?
Yep.
So I do think it's going to be positive.
Should we transition to economic equity based, because you just mentioned wages, right?
Yes. And that's kind of, sorry, thank you. I was losing my point and you brought it back, and I'll make it 10 seconds. Triple bottom line, which actually came out of Australia, right? So that's planet, people, and profit. That's going to matter. And it's going to be externally and internally a new standard. How people measure it, I don't know, but it's going to matter. And it's going to matter for the rest of the time that we're alive. So anyway, what else do you have on the map? What do you think about wages and labor market?
Before I talk about that, I think I want to mention small businesses, because growing up in the Midwest in the 80s and seeing what the Walmarts did to small retail businesses in my hometown, that there's a whole pool of money that was sucked out of that community, where those business owners were spending that within the community. Whereas when the money was going to Walmart or these other big players, it was going to Arkansas. It wasn't going to.
Doesn't stay local. Doesn't enhance the tax base.
Stay local, right? So that's something I hope changes soon, and because that'll be great. And you see some movements online with people saying, okay, now that we're all struggling, we need to focus on small community businesses. So curbside pickups, people are advocating for local restaurants and local this, local that. It's really taking off, which I've never seen it at this scale before. For the average worker, I think they'll be valued a lot higher for two reasons. One, they deserve more pay. Two, the greater number of them are sorry, let me read it because my mind is a bit flaky because I'm a little bit hungover. So I apologize, audience. But there are a greater number of them on the lower level. And when they have money, their money is more fluid in the market, right? So, and whereas if money's trapped in the top 10%, they don't spend it as much as freely. They only spend it on certain things. Whereas that bottom 50%, if you give more income, more wages, higher wages, you start flooding the market with more money that's fluid throughout the market, and that's raising other people up. So, giving people more money is a higher value to the economy. It's not, this whole trickle down economic stuff is crap. It's money fluidity. And it's the 50s, right? When workers had higher wages, the economy was booming because they had higher wages, not because of trickle down stuff,
Well, I mean, 70% of the economy is consumer spending.
Yeah.
And if the consumer can't spend, there's 70% of the economy because we've lost manufacturing. So we'll shift to manufacturing, which we haven't talked about, but that's actually something that will probably change in business.
Yep.
And we should wrap up. We'll probably have to skip education, I think, and just since we did talk a lot about it.
Yep.
And kind of go to family and do the family quick.
Yep.
But one thing I want to say in small business, I do love that trend, but I want to see this out because I think there is a risk of a second Walmartization, which people are talking about, right? Because you got Walmart, Home Depot, Amazon getting the lion's share of business because their competitors in these small businesses are closed right now. And so we've got how many are going to last. Now, I think once they reopen, people will want to support, but here's the change. It's going to cost more, right? So that goes back to your point. Your original point is if you actually want to be part of the change and have an impact, you have to get beyond your own self-interest, which is this mask is worth $2, but I'm going to pay this person $12 because they and their daughter made it. And half of that money is going to frontline workers. So I'm paying 5 times as much. Do I have that? I mean, this is going to be these real questions that people ask. So it's going to be, I think there's the inclination. It'll be really interesting to see if people are financially capable of making that transition while the second Walmartization happens. And at the meantime, as we shift manufacturing onshore and to rely less on China, as prices just naturally rise, right? Unless we have some rapid deflation, which is a whole other podcast.
Absolutely. Yep. So families, talk about families. I mean, from a personal point of view, this has changed. I get more time with my son at home, whereas he just started school. Like I think I'd be stressed under these conditions and there's a lot of anxiety, but the fact that I get to see him every day, wake up next to him and he's here all day, I can pop down, when I'm not working for lunch, I can spend an hour with him on some lessons. Like I think it's brought us closer together. I'm hoping, seeing online, that's what's happening with a lot of my friends, but the value that I'm experiencing with our family is fantastic. That's my selfish thing right there. But I'm hoping everyone else is feeling the same thing. I'm sure there's some stress and anxiety. What are your thoughts?
So your point is you're just appreciating the time, basically, and that people are. So how's that a change? How's that going to be a change? I mean, it was a change to get to this point, but how is it going to change beyond this point? Families, you think they're going to value their time together more? Are they going to choose to spend more time together when they don't have to?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard for me to say what other people are going to go through because I can assume that, and I try not to, but local communities, being closer to that neighborhood rather than actually drifting out and to seek help from others, like that's a possible outcome. I hope that happens because 50s and 60s, they were always about neighbors and communities and things like that, and that's all died, or at least it's not died, but it doesn't seem to be as prevalent as it was before. So hopefully that's an outcome. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard for me to say, but my perception of what's happening is that it's a very positive thing for families in a couple of levels. I think it takes away some of the uncoolness of caring for your family. There was kind of a time in the 2000s. What was that movie? There's like a movie, I think it was called like Four Christmases or something. And it was about, I don't know, I think it was like Luke Wilson. It wasn't one of the Wilsons. And the point is, like, it's like couples not being with their family on Christmas because they just can't handle the family.
Yeah.
And whereas, and that was kind of cool, right? You're like, oh, you're cool. You're like rescuing dogs in Bali Christmas time. Wow. It's like, you're more cooler than we are. But I think now it's cool to hang out with their family. And it's kind of like that you're too busy. It is no longer an excuse that's valid anymore. That was very valid for years, right? We've had this cult of busy, which again is another podcast.
It started in the 80s, I think, that sort of, I'm going to focus on my career and all that other stuff. And
Mr. Business.
Yes, Mr. Business. So yeah, but that's a great observation, and it is true. Like,
what I hope also changes is that and again, I don't know. This is an assumption. So it'll be interesting to see if anyone who's actually still listening and has Twitter will tell us what they think. But I would assume, I'm not sheltering in place with a family, so I cannot speak from personal experience. But I would assume if I were sheltering in place with a family, by this point, we would have had to deal with some issues. And we would have had to just admit this doesn't work, or that communication doesn't work, or those chores are not working out. You would have to deal with a problem. And I think and maybe problems that were swept under the rug for years for whatever reason, who knows? And so, in the same way that I think the love has been legitimatized and destigmatized, hopefully dealing with interpersonal issues in a family becomes destigmatized and people are more realistic about it.
And I think also too, let's differentiate that I think because of the polarization of politics in America, it's probably
what you're talking about, Willis.
Sorry. I perceive it as more of an issue in America, whereas, my friends around the world, their families, obviously everyone has some problems, but like there is less of a divide on political issues where that's a pretty common problem in the US, where family members don't talk. And I don't know how to tell people how to overcome that, in that environment. Like, people just are no longer friends with each other because of politics in America, which is not something that happens outside the US in my experience.
Yeah. I mean, and there's, there could be some of that in families too, because we have heard, I kind of read something today about like friends who like broke up over COVID. So there's some resetting of relationships as well too. Speaking of resetting, we should probably reset this podcast. We've gone on, we are going to kind of allow ourselves to go over 30 minutes, but we've gone on a little bit longer than that. But this was great, man. One of the things we're going to leave in the show notes is this great thing that you sent me. Is the pandemic making you smarter? And I'm just going to use a little quote from that. Exposure to absurdity made people twice as insightful in a study that they had done. And the other quote is, in normal times when things around us make sense, our brains work on default mode. And so in this environment where, we're not on default mode, we have the opportunity to actually really grow our brains and change and embrace change. And we should just kind of stay flexible.
Also, quick note, another reference. If anybody gets a chance, if you're listening, read a book called Our Iceberg is Melting by John Cotter. It's a book about change. It's about a bunch of penguins on an iceberg, and one penguin realizes that the iceberg is melting and tries to raise the alarm to the rest of the community of penguins. And it's about the struggle he goes through with trying to raise awareness and get everyone to agree that they need to change so that they can all survive. So it's a really good book. It's a great...
Jim, the penguins, we're going to talk about next week.
Okay.
We're talking about books next week. So sorry to cut you off, partner, but I do want to wrap us up for today.
Yep.
So thank you for tuning in. Let's go silver linings. Let's hope some of these good dreams come true. Let's hope people jump in early to help make them true, and they tamp down their self-interest so that the best result can happen for the common good, as we used to say at my old alma mater. With that, I'm out, partner. Have a great day over in Sydney.
Respect,
aloha, and stay golden, and we'll catch you next week.
Take care.